Welcome back. My name is Igor. I am QA automation engineer and this is QA routine channel where we discover different topics regarding test automation. And today's video is about storybooks. Storybooks testing, what is it, how to build it, how to use it, and why it's particularly useful for QA automation engineers. And let's start. Storybook is a front-end workshop for building UI components and pages in isolation. And not only building but also testing, which is important for us as QA engineers. And Storybooks is used in different front-end frameworks like Vue or React. And today we are going to learn about React, how to build simple storybook with React. And as we can see, Storybook itself contains different information. For example, it could be used for development. You can choose different states of your component with different colors and test it out different ideas. Next is component testing, where you can write some actions like clicking, selecting elements, and finding some texts. And final is visual testing. Let's say you as QA automation engineer wants to make sure that visual representation stays the same after latest front-end changes. How you can achieve that? One of the way is to build visual regression testing using one of front-end testing frameworks. For example, it could be Playwright or Selenium based. And it's a good choice, of course, but there is a downside. If you want to test some pages, you need to prepare all the information for that pages. Let's assume that you want to test user account area, and for that you need to register user, you need to fill in all the user account data, and then finally open that page and compare with previous condition. All the preconditions require some time and configuration. We can avoid that by using storybooks. With Storybook we can build a component. We can build component for storybooks with different conditions and take a screenshot of that storybook and then compare it. It's much faster than having end-to-end test, and also it spreads the load, because using end-to-end tests it requires test automation engineer to be looked at. But with storybooks we can introduce it to our front-end developers and set it up on CI and to be a part of deployment process. And for example, if visual regression testing is failing, we can fail the build, and front-end developers needs to investigate the issue. And when we talk about end-to-end testing, it's probably more on QA automation side. And so when we have everything in one place, like you have end-to-end test and you have visual regression testing, it makes a great load on QA automation engineer. And with storybooks we can spread it. We can make accountable for storybooks our front-end engineers. And that's important point. Let's start over. As I mentioned previously, we are going to take a look at React. And there is a handy instruction on how to set up it for React Native as well. For example, let's run a simple command where we clone our template. With that command in place, we cloned our task box, which consists some default code. We are not interested in it right now. Let's get back to our browser and let's follow the commands. We are going to see. Now we are going to install our dependency. Right, we are waiting for installation. While we are waiting, we can proceed. This template contains the necessary styles, assets, and bare essential configuration. Let's have a quick view what we got here. There is a public, we are not interested in that. We want to look at our font, stories. There is a button CSS, header CSS. It's not particularly interesting for us. Let's get back. And let's run our default storybook. Yarn storybook. It's easy command. Yarn storybook. Fine. We are waiting while it's building. And our first storybook is ready. There is some default button elements like second, large, small, header, and the rest. But let's try to build our first component. And we can also run our application. We can start new console. We can say nvm use 18 version. And let's start. Okay, we need to navigate to task box, and let's start our comment. Alright, it's available on localhost and not that much. It's just a counter, simple one. And we don't want to commit the changes. And let's follow to next chapter. Finally, there is a first component which named tasks. And also, as you might know, there is a TDD, test-driven development methodology, where you first write tests and then you write the functionality itself. For front-end, it's also present. It's called component-driven development. That's where you try to build a skeleton of component and then with Storybook and then finally implement it. And we can see a task here. There are 3 states: default, pinned, and archived. It differs on pinned has a star and archived is actually with gray elements. Finally, we have some states like title. We have some states, three of them: default, pinned, and archived, and title. Let's create our component, source components task gs6. Let's first create it. Source, then we need component directory, new folder component, then we want to create a new file, task gs6. Nice. Next, we want to actually implement our task. Let's just copy the code and see what it does. Basically, we have a div with list item and we just have a label with title. That's it for now. Next, we want to create task stories. We need to copy and then paste, and then we want to rename it task stories gs6, and also we need to rename it to components. Alright, let's copy our task stories. Basically, let's copy and see what is going on there. Alright, first we need to import our task. We need to define a couple of stub functions which we are going to mock. It's on archive task and on pinned task. And finally, we need to initialize our component with the name task. We need to provide title, some tags which we will discover later, exclude some stories where we have data name, and that's basically actions data. It's not stories, and we need to specify it. And finally, arguments. It's actually our actions data. It's 2 stubs functions. Finally, first state, it's a default one with task where ID 1, title, task, test task, and task inbox state. Next state is task pinned. That's basically default state. That's when we have a star, pinned star, and when we have task archived. Alright, when we initialize our task stories, let's get back to the documentation. We can see our task story next. We want to talk a little bit about organizing our storybooks. There are 2 basic levels of storybooks. It's basically the component and its child stories. So it's pretty flat, I would say. And we can see the name of component itself. We can see the title of it. We can see tags which automatically generate documentation for our components, and exclude stories. That's the part of stories which we don't want to build. As we saw previously, it's our stub methods. And args, that's basically arguments which we pass to our component. Finally, we need to adjust our operation. First of all, it's Let's open it. That's Storybook main.js, and we need to add some import statement. We need to set, first of all, we need to set stories here, and we need to replace it with default value. Right now we need only components. We don't want to have the rest. Next, we want to add our CSS to preview.js. Preview.js also located in .storybook. And here we just need to provide our import statement for CSS. Okay, we will see later what's going on in that index CSS. When that is done, we can proceed ahead and rebuild our component, rebuild our storybook. For building storybook, we just hit yarn storybook, and let's wait. Here we go. We have 3 states: default, pinned, and archived. Right now they are all the same. That's because our component is not ready yet, but the structure for the component is already ready. And basically we first write the structure of our component, and now we can implement it. And let's get back. Build our states. Basically we already have a task, our task component, and now we can copy it and see in greater details. Let's open our components task. Let's replace existing with a new one. So fine, we have a task, again we have a div, and we have a label with IDs. That's basically ID which we pass as an argument. We see 3 possible arguments: ID, title, and state, which we defined earlier, plus on archive task and on pin task. That's 2 stubs methods. We see here input, which is going to be checked in case if it's archived. Next, we see span, which on click calls on archive task. And finally, we see our input with read-only state. And if task is not archived, we are going to add a pin button with icon star actually. And if it's pinned, icon star going to have a different CSS style. We will see it later. That's a small component, and we are ready to add some states. To add states, we need to first of all import prop types. As it mentioned, best practice to use prop types in React to specify the shape of data that a component expects. And we are going to use it. We need to add our prop type here at the beginning. And next we need to control our prop types. We need to set which prop types we are expecting to have. We can copy just this part and see what it does. Let's insert it. Let's replace plus with empty value, replace all. Okay, so we see that we are expecting to have a task with ID, title, and state, 3 required parameters. And finally 2 functions on archive task and on pin task. That's basically requirements for our component. Nice. Let's rebuild our story. It should look much prettier. Again, yarn storybook. And here we go. First default state, it's not archived and it's not pinned. Next, we have a pinned state where we see a star is in active state. And finally, archive state. Now we can see why we actually need that CSS, because there is a style which we apply to our icon star. We can open our CSS file, which is located in source index CSS, and try to look for our icon style, icon star, and see content there. If task is pinned, we are going to add a color for it. We are looking for our class. In next episode, we are going to build visual regression testing with Storybook's components, and we are going to use our custom solution, which is totally free. There is also a chromatic one version. It starts from $150 per month, but we can build on our own for free. It's not that difficult. It's just like 10 lines of code, and you can run it on CI configuration without any problem. And we will discover it in the next episode. So stay tuned, and till the next time.